Hello, Julian here again. Welcome to the June meeting, or my meetings with Stephen Bauman. This month we're focusing on value this month, and I'm pretty happy with how my drawings are progressing. If you're interested in anything Stephen Bauman, I have links in the description if you want to find out more about Stephen. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. With that said, I think I'm just going to jump into the video now. This is my cat.
The YouTube project going?
YouTube project? I think it's going rather well. I'm enjoying it. And I think I think we mentioned this before, but the practice of keeping these recordings and then reviewing them slowly, getting to reflect on what was said. I don't know if this is the same with you, but like in a lot of conversations, I'll forget pretty important parts of the conversation. And then,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely do that. You know, like I also have like a feeling subsequently that like I'm just 45 and my memory is dope, you know.
Hopefully, I'm trying to keep sharp, mentally sharp. Sometimes you just let go of things here and there and it's okay. But yeah, it's fun. I think it really helps get more value out of these kinds of meetings. And I think it really does help to help the drawing process.
Yeah. And you edit out of it, I see.
Yeah, I do edit out quite a bit of things. Like if there's a couple seconds of silence, I'll cut it out.
Ah, by the way, just FYI, I must have told you about Riverside.
Yes, yeah.
That will automate that. Although I guess for you, the point is to go through them again.
Yeah.
Not process.
Yeah, it's quite fun because sometimes I'll follow a train of thought and there's a bunch of words that are said in between, and then I'll try to follow the train of thought and see which words I can pick out so that it's a more coherent narrative, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So doing that mental exercise, it requires concentration, and it also improves your like how engaged you are with the material. So I think that's quite nice, and it's quite funny. You know, those, I don't know what they call them, but like the ums and the kind of sounds.
Yeah.
I've gotten used to their shape on the waveform on the editor.
I totally know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, here's an coming up from Steven. Like, oh, there it is. Yeah, cut it out. Yep.
Man, you know, the things that you start to become self-conscious about when you record your own speech and then not only record it, edit it afterwards. The sheer variety of ums, especially when I'm talking while doing something else, it is uncomfortable. And it also makes you admire broadcasters and, you know, extemporaneous speakers who have eliminated that from their... You never hear an on television. You know what I mean? You never hear an on, let's say, a more professional, like BBC podcast, for example. People treat it out of themselves. And it is possible to simply pause and then continue speaking without that kind of conjoinder. But
Yeah.
wow, it's just, there's a lot of self-hate wrapped up in the ums.
Oh no. I think it's definitely there you go. It's definitely, it feels like it's more permissible nowadays. I had a high school teacher who had a pool noodle. And whenever someone would say or like in a part of the sentence, he'd come from his desk across to the room and then he'd smack you with the pool noodle. So it was kind of like almost literally beaten out of you.
Real lesson.
Yeah.
I am actually old enough. I was telling this story yesterday. You know, like things in your past, like that come up through an anecdote.
Yeah.
I forget. No, I do remember exactly why I was doing this. I was talking to a student about something they were doing and telling them that I needed to like reprimand them for it so that they would remember it and not do it again. I'm old enough that when I was a child, I went to a small Christian school for a couple of years. And it was still in a time when if you did something bad, they would hit your hand with a ruler,
Oh, okay. Old school.
like smack you on the back of your hand as like a way to remind you not to do that thing. Which strikes me as perhaps draconian for first graders.
First grade?
Yeah. It was not we were not, well, I wasn't 16, but yeah, no, it was a pool noodle. Fantastic. Let's stay with,
Yeah. If that was a ruler, I think it would be a little bit more. The
memorable.
teacher would probably get reprimanded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been, of course, my back and leg have been giving me issues for some months now.
Oh, really?
I'm in a relatively good place, but I still have some like nerve discomfort in my leg, which means, and I think overall standing is just empirically generally better for you than sitting for long periods. You said that you wanted to talk about value applications specifically. Was it specifically dark halftone value application?
Yeah. It's funny how, like, I review the video sometimes, and that line you, like you just said, you wanted to talk about value application. That line's been the opening line for many of our meetings. uh, but yes, I think I'm getting a handle of it now. So it's almost getting a bit too specific, but that's where I think I could get the most improvement is in the transition from halftone into to shadow, because I still feel very inept in that in doing it. I'm
Hmm.
I would say that I can piece out where the shadow begins and ends, and then do like a two-tone drawing where it's just light and shadow.
Yeah.
But as far as refining it to the point where the form is turning softly where it needs to turn softly, and hard edges where you need a hard edge, I think my skill level for that is still lagging. I think with practice I'll get better at it. If you had any specific exercises or considerations or tools that you would recommend trying out, because most of what I do is just use pencils for the most part, and I do have like a tortillon or like a paper stump or tissue that I can use.
Will be required, really. There is a lot of ways, of course, to get to like a gradient or transitional edge. These edges in particular are ones that I would describe as not having a global sensibility. They are very much drawn by someone who's focused on this edge in particular, not necessarily how those edges are affecting like the big overall impression of the head. And while that's fine, that's what shape recognition is, and value application and shape recognition are kind of tied together quite intrinsically, there is an important thing to consider that those edges kind of need to be way softer in order that the edges which actually are important and crisp can also kind of feel that way. It's almost like a value scale, whereas if you kind of over darken everything, you're not going to have any room for dark accents, or conversely, if your lights are way too unified, you're not going to have space for the highlights because there'll be no value surrounding them. And I think that's kind of the case with a lot of these edges. There's two things that I want to bring up that I think are solutions for this. One is that while the mask portion of your exercise, I think, goes really well, but there is a loss of what I think is a very useful thing, and that is to have a linear element. That's important because if we rely a lot on mass to describe form and solidity, I think that we hit a maybe quite low ceiling in terms of like how solid the form can feel. This, I don't actually have maybe a very empirical way to describe, but the combination of values which are treated with a high degree of softness and gradient combined together with a really appropriate use of line has a feeling of structure and solidity that's kind of scarcely possible otherwise. And so what I'd recommend to you is not necessarily just to figure out what dark halftones are supposed to do, because obviously that is in your remit to figure out, but to consider as well that their transition from dark into light needs to be handled with a sensitivity to softness that is in excess of what you're currently doing. You see what I mean?
I'll try to restate. Are you saying that is it the transitions that you're saying that need to be more soft?
Yes, that's
Okay.
the line point. But I want to incorporate into that also another idea, is
Mm.
that softening the transition is not actually the only solution. What you need to do is to soften the transition, yes, but also strengthen, I think, the linear contours or linear boundaries in the areas where that's possible to do.
Mm.
If you have strong linear boundaries and you have really nice soft gradients in between shadow and light, I think then you unlock a kind of form that is, I feel like, greater than the sum of its parts. It's very hard to describe this, and I've said over and over again to students, I don't have the most empirical way to give you an example of why this works, but very softly used values and transitions in combination with a strong and appropriate use of line creates a solidity of form that mass drawing simply cannot do. I was at
Uh,
the museum here in Rome recently, and I was looking at, there's a couple of paintings by an artist called Giulio Aristide Sartorio. And, well, of course, that he's fantastic, but he makes these sort of massive, kind of over life-size paintings, and the use of value and line in them is very much like this. And if you kind of take a look at just this area around the eye, or by the way, I bring that up because this was just kind of brought home to me, and like the solidity and feeling of reality of the things that he painted was so strong. But if you look at the difference in between, for example, that cheek on the left, now and now, one of those gives you the feeling that you can really grab a hold of that and feel
mhm.
it.
Mhm.
The other doesn't. So it's not really a problem in your value recognition or your value application. I think it's the way that you incorporate edges and lines that will determine how real and how crisp and how kind of form oriented your drawings will seem. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I think it just clicked for me that you're drawing earlier you drew a comparison to in the way that if you're struggling with highlights and dark accents, you kind of look to refine the opposite. So like a highlight will only work if the area around it is dark.
Yes,
The A soft edge will only work if there are other hard edges.
exactly.
Yeah.
And this is to the point, when students learn this, I think very much what happens is softness becomes the predominant identity of value application. And what you wind up with is very soft drawings. But that's actually not the goal.
Mm.
Goal is to have drawings that feel solid and feel quite real and have that appearance. So that means then combining it with the alternative. So while all of your value application, I think, is going very well, what we need is like an expanded role for, I would say it's for transition, but maybe that belies that there's kind of more happening than that. It's not just making a soft edge in between two values. It's kind of applying a whole layer of value concept to your drawing. These soft values should still represent planes. Now, I don't mean that in the sense that we should outline them, with a sort of solid kind of geometry. But each time you're applying these values, you should be thinking, what direction is this plane facing? And how does that relate to the light source? Without that, I think you will kind of lose everything. And I think, again, this is one of the pitfalls of students who hear your transitions need to be softer, is that they do make them softer, but they don't have an idea of the planes of the head, and so that softness just becomes a bubblegum-like mass of sort of a cloud of value, rather than values applied to planes.
Yeah, it seems like you have to keep in mind so many different things. It's not enough that it's like a soft transition from one value to another. The values themselves have to be the correct one.
Yeah. So many of mistakes are not mistakes of misuse, they're mistakes of lacking a counterpoint. When I was a student, one of my teachers, or it was very much an idea that was discussed like around the studio, but that drawing and painting were a lot like juggling. If you have one ball in the air, you're not really juggling. 2, then you're juggling. 3, you're impressively juggling. 4, and you're like really putting on a show. Mm-hmm. And so with this, the value application, as just for example, your value application has improved massively. And so now we have this situation where I think the values that you apply here, yes, they're doing exactly what they should do. And you're not juggling one ball. Let's not be, I don't want to diminish you by saying that. Because also the proportion of the head, the construction of the head, there's like many things that are going on here that I think are positive and merit consideration as far as like what improvement looks like. However, the next thing is going to be adding like another ball to that, where you're working in a better way with the edges in your value application. It's not that they all need to be soft. Some of them need to be hard, but they need that kind of counterpoint. They need both sides of the spectrum to be kind of represented there.
I'm watching you do it, and I think it doesn't look like you're looking at the reference. So this is just like you're kind of thinking about, I know that this form is there, let me bring it out. Is that right?
Yeah, it's funny that I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. It's funny also when you live an artist's life, you kind of, I guess it's probably the same for engineers, whatever else. Your friends are engineers, so your life becomes surrounded in like engineering. My life is kind of surrounded. I'm talking to a friend, but we're talking about kind of rendering and value application and like education and all these things. I was talking about how very often, being kind of 20-something years into this, I can take things for granted. I almost forgot to mention, talking about your drawing, that the proportions look very good. Obviously, that's an accomplishment in itself. But when it's happening, I simply cease to talk about it, and I talk about the next thing that isn't happening. I take for granted that everybody and anybody, once equipped with the idea that the eyes are across from each other and the nose and mouth tilt in the same way, in my mind, should be able to do that. They might not do it well, it might not be accompanied by a good drawing, but these things should be, in their implicitness, should be immediately applicable. Things like what we're talking about now, where it's like value application based on plane, I think that there are implicit parts of that. I think that there are parts of that if you know it, simply should happen. But I suspect that the threshold of understanding there is a little bit higher. For me, and I think this is what I see in your work that arrives, is that if you start with a premise, it is round. And value is how we indicate roundness. You simply must continue adding more value to the dark side and less value to the light side. if you continue that, form will arrive. And I think that your drawing here is like a really great evidence of that, how just simply maintaining that information or maintaining that concept. I mean, the eye socket, even without anything that I change about it, it has that sense of kind of depth and roundness because you're applying values with the right concept. That's going to evolve and get better, but I think the effective knowledge part is present, which I think is something to look at. However, a place where it isn't is the front plane of the lip. This somehow has kind of escaped attention, is still getting treated just broadly as a light shape, rather than something that has planes in itself. The front plane of the lower lip, as you can see in the model, does have a drop-off in value between this right-hand side and the central part, right?
Yeah, and like, if you're familiar enough with the planes, this is just something that and you know to look for. And it's funny too because the boot camp, I was working on the boot camp assignment for this month, and it's giant pair of lips. So
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you, that one tested me, Julian. I was,
really,
I've always said like lips are what I find hardest to draw. And while I don't think that this lesson made them any easier, because I think the difficulty of them is based on essentially their form and the volume they sit on. That's what makes it hard. I was massively tested by the idea of putting that much pattern onto form. I found it really, really difficult. Way harder than, say, working with eyelashes, stuff like that. But yeah. Then coming to the neck, this is the part where I feel most definitively, the part wherein your style of value application most explicitly stands in your way of getting done what you need to get done. Going from what you are doing here into resolution, it's not impossible, but you've, I think, made it as hard as you possibly can.
great.
And I just know this, like in graphite, once you start out with that kind of edge running through these areas, it's very difficult to ultimately get to the soft definition that they actually require. What's going to happen is that you'll more often than not preserve the sharpness that you've kind of created there, when in fact there isn't actually much of any argument for it. Especially when you consider everything happening here in comparison, say, to like what the edge of the jaw is, as far as like what the transitional nature of each one is. So this, I would love for you to get very used to, passages like that being a kind of fog of value. I think that fog obviously is related to form, and that fog is obviously as well related to plane, but you will simply make more, I don't want to use these weird antiquated sayings, make more hay. You will make progress with less work by understanding that from the start and allowing it to be that, which really is the theme of like what the rest of this critique is that I think you need to embrace a different kind of level of rendering for areas that require it, because otherwise you'll simply be doing work that I think doesn't really pay you back. Like I'm all for, like, let's say if we over define something and that over definition is paid back in the long term because maybe it gives us kind of a deeper understanding of what an area is. I would say this would be maybe like working on the sharpness and detail of the eye, even from an early stage in line, because I think it gives us like a lot of feeling of what the structure of the eye is, and it makes our rendering a little bit easier later on. I don't think that's the case with the neck. I think everything about the neck always would look better, would proceed better and faster if it simply lacked those edges. Now this requires you to know something, to like know that they should be that way, but I come back to this notion about like implicit ideas. Once you understand something, it becomes more difficult to kind of not do it. You know, once you understand that there is like a value hierarchy between light and dark, and in order for the light to seem light, the dark needs to get dark, it's difficult to make a drawing that does not satisfy that because you just know so well that it must.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a unconscious effort. Maybe in the beginning it's a conscious effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the knowledge that leads to that understanding will be like a conscious acquisition that you'll have to kind of reflect on. But yeah, eventually it's just part of the gumbo. You know, it's another one I don't know why I use. Gumbo is just this soup that is an accumulation of a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And that stuff is like the flavor is subsumed inside of the overall flavor of the gumbo. And a lot of like drawing information is like that. Even anatomy is like that. It's one more thing that you kind of chuck into the pot. It's not the soup. It's not the meal. It gets subsumed inside of this like larger system.
I think that's kind of what I view skill acquisition and expertise is. At some point, the drills that you do, they'll seem awkward at first, and then they'll just be part of you down the line. Something you
Yeah.
just do.
Yeah, I mean, think about how, it's funny to say, but like, you know, when kids first start using their hands
Hmm.
and they're like grabbing at stuff, I see
Yeah.
this my friend Steve's kids, which are, I think, 9 and 13. He's got a very young one, but it's not at the stage yet. So, like, at 9, you're pretty sure about how your hands work. But then to, like, watch them pour milk for a bowl of cereal, that it actually arrives in the shape that it's supposed to without spilling everything,
Uh-huh.
you know, feel a certain perilousness watching them do it.
Hmm.
It's a function that you and I now today, or even her at 13, 14, 15, will do with complete unconscious expertise. But there is that period where it's like, I can do it, I know what it is, but I really got to focus, and it could wind up not working out the way I hope.
Yeah, for sure. I had a moment similar. At some point, I'd hurt my left hand. So there was a cut on my left hand, and I was cooking dinner. And so I needed to keep cutting up the vegetables. But since my left hand had a cut on it, I didn't want to use it to hold the vegetables for like contamination reasons. So I switched my knife hand and trying to cut vegetables with your non-dominant hand is it kind of felt like it's my first time holding a knife.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
It's a great metaphor for like, yeah, kind of skill acquisition and that what that first phase kind of feels like. I think sometimes I don't. Again, I get so far from these things that I don't necessarily like remind beginning students of that. But to that point, I was actually thinking of doing a boot camp episode, and maybe I'll break it up because we've done 2 big features in a row, actually over 3 months, to do a left-handed drawing. Which I
Oh
think
no.
yeah. Oh no. That's the response I'm looking for actually.
Okay. Great.
Because I think it's one of those things where you will really have to rely on what you know, not at all what you can do. And I actually think that when we draw, we develop bad habits. I'm not saying that I always look at drawing in a framework of this is good and this is bad, because, you know, obviously I believe that there's a lot of different positive outcomes that you can arrive at in a variety of ways. But up to a certain point, there can be an over-reliance on rendering because you're not sure what else to do. But if you put yourself into a situation in which that's impossible, you'll have to only do the other thing. So I think the left-hand project would be, first of all, like fun and challenging. Second of all, it would be something nobody ever does without being prompted to do it.
Mhm.
And third, would likely expose some kind of conceptual gaps or let people focus in a very real way on what they haven't acquired knowledge-wise.
Yeah, I can see the benefits of it.
By the way, I just want to say also, like, what a what a head. I think it's a really, I mean, a really, really good job. And the progress you've made in values is, I mean, it's really, really good. And I'm happy to see it.
Thank you.
Now, all of the improvements that we want to make, you know, are a part of that. But it's cool to be able to focus on just one basic, pretty big issue that would be a pivotal change in your drawing.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel like it doesn't feel basic when I'm floundering around.
That's interesting to say floundering. I don't, do you still
Yeah.
actually do that with your drawing that you feel floundering?
Yeah. I think when I like I'll look at this and I'd kind of notice like there's a lot of hard edges. I need to soften them. And yeah, you hit the points right in your overdrawing. I think I know what has to happen, but I can't it's hard to make it happen for me. So like I'll think about, all right, well, if the light side is too light, then let's add value. But what do I use? Do I use a paper stump to like pull the transition? Do I use just an H pencil to start and then gradually go into like HB?
Yeah. You know,
Um,
I'm very much obviously by any means necessary type.
yeah,
And while I don't want to stop short of like prescribing to you like an exact technical method to make this happen, it is much more about you seeing and utilizing the relationship that you're creating between this and what's happening in here. Whether it's with soft hatching that over time produces like a static field effect, whether it's through a stump rubbing in value or anything in between those, reorganizing your drawing to have possession of these two contrasting application types, that is actually the solution. And you brought up something in talking about your inner monologue in your drawing that I think is salient here, saying there's all these hard edges, I need to soften them. In fact, even this is kind of part of the problem. It's that you made them hard to begin with that is the issue. There is not, and that's what I tried to say about working on the neck, the pathway of going from I made them way too hard to soft or appropriately soft is, I think, going across the river to get a drink of water. Know that they should be soft. See where the hard edges actually are, and simply don't put them where they aren't.
okay.
That's the basic where you start from. You eliminate a part of the workflow, which is I spend a lot of time making them all too hard, and then I have another mountain to climb that is making them soft again. But it's an invented
Yeah.
challenge. I say that not, it's an invented challenge because you are intellectually weak. It's just an invented to present it with something that you're trying to figure out how to arrange it, and a step-by-step process is how I think we often are coached to proceed through things. The more and more that I make artwork, the more and more I make drawings, I find that it's less like that and more like a whole performance. Sure, you can like practice making softness. That's fine. I don't say you can't do that. It's a bit of a mindless activity. I would find it difficult to like want to do it. But you could practice that. But I think it's more like knowing what the thing is and just kind of doing it right in the moment. Maybe even performance is not like the right thing, but it's kind of like they say with dog training, you know? Punishing your dog after something happened is a complete irrelevance to that. They've already forgotten about it. You need to find them in the moment when the thing is happening, and that's when you can make an impact. It's like that in this. It's kind of the most effective moment is when you're actually doing the thing, finding out the way to do it right in that moment. It doesn't always happen, but that's the optimal learning state, I think, in drawing.
Yeah, and it does make sense like going to a like an in-person workshop because these are very helpful, obviously, like sending my wherever drawing state it's in. But you only get to see one state of the drawing. And you don't see me going in and taking my 4B and then making this chin edge hard. Because
You
at
know,
some point it was an HB edge and then it became like a 4B edge,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think just knowing it and doing it right in the moment when you manufacture it. Yeah. The There's another student of mine who's very, I think, very logical, very rational, perhaps too much so for drawing, to be fair, because there is an element of feel it out in drawing that is, I think, just a necessary part of the equation. But one of the things he kind of came to the same conclusion as you, that if I could see the stages it had gone through, that it would have been interesting. But he started to send me time lapses of doing this drawing. So I actually can see the different phases that it goes through. And like one of the things actually that was kind of remarkable to see in one of them is that I think he was designing some hair in his portrait, and he had nailed it and then changed it completely. So there's other kind of revelations that you can have by being able to watch the actual process take place in, not in real time, but in a time lapse to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that edge did go through this stage. It did then eventually become something else. But yeah, and also like in all of this, I understand there is a version actually of what you're doing where you can kind of over sharpen and over crisp your shadow edges in order to try to make a drawing that seems more substantial. And then yes, you can work your way out of that. But to my mind, I think it's less efficient, and B, I don't think it's necessary. I don't like it's a thing that's done because it's done, not because it's necessary to do it that way. Like I'm sure you've seen it that, some drawings, in some studios will be, and I think I've even made demos like this where you'd say like the shadow edge is like this. And then if we model and render and like add enough halftone to it, we can create the kind of transition out of that we want. The problems I have with this are multiple. One is that it kind of locks you into kind of one rendering concept that only ever works in one lighting situation. And two, it also is, I think, a much harder way of getting the job done than is actually required. And it has a tendency to, not the guarantee of, but the tendency to cause you to kind of kill your shadows in a way that ultimately you only will do in academic exercise-based scenarios. Like it's not something I think I find myself doing like in my artistic career.
What do you mean kill your shadows?
Well, let's say that you put a lot of weight or a lot of merit on what the shape of the exterior of the shadow is, right?
Mm-hmm.
This causes you to focus all your attention on rendering the shadow outward from that point. The thing that happens generally is that the interior of that shadow simply becomes flat. And this is the sort of, shadows atmosphere, flatness paradigm that, like I said, works a bit in one situation. And that situation is when you have like a super primary dominant light source that leaves behind a lot of times like a sharper edge than you find in almost any other scenario. Like I would even say it looks more like an artificial light solution where it's like a pin light, not even like the softbox that you see behind me here, which is relatively small, would produce a shadow edge that was like that hard. And so there's very few situations in our lives as artists where we encounter a lighting situation that is that hard and that specific. Make sense?
Yeah, I think you said it. It kind of flattens the interior of the shadow if you're focused on that practice of rendering.
Yeah, I would say it's a rendering style or a prioritization of information, call it a bias, or even style. Yeah, style is a decent way to say it. I think that's probably the common way that people would understand it, to say that's the style of rendering, style of value application.
Yeah, I can see that the practice of making or marking the shadow edge with a very hard line. From our conversations, I think in the past, I decided for myself, and I think you also asserted this, that that practice itself is kind of like a teaching tool where like they're teaching students to mentally recognize the shadow and light difference, or yeah, like to segment in their head, this is an area of light, this is an area of shadow. But I guess if you want to do more refined drawing, you can't just have light and shadow. There's like, you have to also take account the form in the shadow. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely. And beyond even just being like accurate, I think it is the practical end that I think most of us should want to come to, because again, even if you're just doing this for the sake of like, I only want to be able to make pictures. Life and light are diverse, and that style of rendering is only made for one of them. It works well in one place. You will not drive your boat down the street. It's not made for that. And that shadow light dichotomy thing, you take it into any situation that's a little bit diverse, massive gaps in your ability to like cope with and render that subject come in. Doesn't mean it's useless. It just means like it is one thing among others that can be utilized to create a good sense of form and a good sense of impression. And I use it. I mean, there'll be places inside the face where I'll focus on shadow and light because I think that's the most useful, effective thing in that place. There's other places where it ain't. It's just not that. There is one thing that I noticed just from a structural perspective that I think starts to bug me is the location of the bottom edge of the lower lip, where it's kind of turning over to the chin.
Mm-hmm.
This is cut into the left just a little bit. If we think about where the philtrum is in the central line of the lips, feels like that wants to be a little bit further over, kind of in relationship to the source image. So
Central line construction.
yeah, a little bit, and maybe it's also just where some of that value landed more so than like actually a construction problem, but it gives the impression of that being kind of in the wrong place.
Yeah, and it makes sense to me that even if by some weird coincidence that if the reference itself looks that way, the center line isn't communicated as well, you may still want to take your artistic license and shift it over just to better communicate the symmetry.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I just made a mistake.
It's a dodgy or an edgy thing to say, but I think it does stand to reason that at times your source image can indicate things to you that would be suboptimal, at least to include up until you're sure it's really a thing. Obviously at the beginning you index on symmetry because mostly that's what you'll find until you get to the very end where you can say the thing that's wrong is how symmetrical it is. Like that's such a rare thing to find yourself having to say. Were there things in this one that we didn't get to talk about that were on your mind?
Honestly, the hair, you might have already noticed like the state of rendering that it's in. That I don't really, do you have any suggestions for how to tackle the hair here? Or is it just like I don't want to do the thing where I look for every pocket of value, right?
Yeah.
I kind of want to unify as much as I can. How do you do it with curly hair? Because it feels like it's very difficult.
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, I know what I would do is that I would try to focus on what system I could create that would mostly look like what it is. And then I would apply that system to the global form concept that I find there. So to me, is I know that I would go through with my fingers saturated with like a lot of very soft graphite, and I would just start smudging a pattern into the darkest areas of the head. Just considering that if I continue to put soft but dark values in patches, that eventually I'll probably reach a place that resembles the form and the light on this hair. At the point at which I arrive at the ultimate expression of that endeavor, I would then try to see what work was necessary to get it to look ultimately as true as it's supposed to. I think that those things are different from each other in that there's probably just a few areas where you need to really like augment and express the shape to kind of get to the overall feeling of what our hair is. And the rest of it you can do in a kind of systematized way. That would be my best bet for kind of what happens to get the hair to arrive where you want. Does that make sense?
I tried to follow. So you put patches of dark value, saturating your finger with graphite, and then going into that. That's an interesting thing. I've never thought to do that. To like just maybe rub your pencil with your finger and then go in with your
Yeah.
finger that way.
The other way that it works is that you can like apply a rough value with a very dark pencil in these patches, and then rub patches of it like this until they kind of represent those soft transitional shapes that you're trying to make. Either one of those can work just fine, whether you're actually smudging all of it on or you're applying graphite in some places and then smudging it. But it will require like a particular kind of graphite. I think that you need those Conte Apera sticks to really get your ultimate sort of smudge work to be as strong as possible.
Yeah, I'll fiddle around with it.
Julian, as always, pleasure. I've got to go on to my next meeting.
All right. Well, what all same to you. Always a pleasure, Stephen. Thanks so much for your help.
No worries. Take care of yourself, man.
Take care, Stephen. Talk to you next month or sooner.